What's success? Money? Fame? Success of the true artist is in knowing the truth of his vision is in his own terms. Artist Maynard Dixon. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Greg Newbold is a fine art painter and illustrator based near Salt Lake City, Utah. Greg says that for him, art is a soulful expression. His hope is that a piece of him comes out at the end of his brush, onto the surface of a painting, and connects with the spirit of the viewer. His compelling visions of the American West are distilled through the filter of his own life experiences. Building upon that, he applies his own unique creative filters of simplification, light, color, shape, and texture. The result of this creative alchemy are paintings that feature bold composition, strong value structure, sensitive color, and strong narrative. Just as the ancient cliffs of sandstone show evidence of the effect of the relentless forces of water and wind, so do the tactile expressive marks upon the surface of a Greg Newbold painting give evidence of process. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Greg, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It's good to have you on The Artful Painter. Been meaning to do this for quite some time.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you're located in the Salt Lake area?
Right. Yeah, we're about 20 minutes south of downtown.
Oh, okay. South of downtown.
South and to the east. Yeah,
Right.
It's all, it's all urban sprawl, so it's all part of Salt Lake.
Years ago, my family and I, we stayed in an area that was to the northeast, Bear Lake.
Oh, see, that's about 2 hours north and east. That's a bit of a jaunt.
That was pretty country.
It's beautiful up there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
got a friend that lives up there, close to Bear Lake, painter. His name's Josh Clare.
Oh, he's up that way. Okay.
Yeah, he's up in Cache Valley up there. So
yeah,
it's a beautiful area.
He's another person I'd like to have on the show someday.
He's very personable. You like him.
I met him at Vision X Live. I think it was Vision X Live. It was the thing that Sentient Academy did.
Right.
Brian Mark Taylor. And so that I just met him briefly, talked to him briefly, but that was it. I never really had an opportunity to get to know him. So, when I look at your Instagram, which I just started following today, I'm sorry.
Well, welcome.
I thought I was following it. And so as all good, hopefully I'm a good podcaster. I don't know, but you do a little research. Yeah.
I have enjoyed your interviews. So,
well, thanks, Greg. I appreciate that. But so I went to Instagram, promptly followed you when I realized the errors of my way. But I was looking at your little, how Instagram gives you that little bio at the heading, and yours, I think you say artist, illustrator, creator, something like that. And then you give a reason why you're that. And I thought that was interesting because you said, because life needs art.
Right.
Where did that come from?
Well, when I was in grad school, 2007-ish, we had a business and marketing class, and one of the assignments was to come up with some sort of mission statement. And I brainstormed, and my wife and I finally came up with life needs art. So, it's like, can you imagine a life without art?
Well, I think Yeah.
in any aspect, it would be, everything would be so boring. No music, no writing, no visual, no graphic design, no industrial design, no interior design. I think life would be tedious and terribly boring without art.
Yeah, it could be a world of brutalist art, brutalist architecture. Of course, some people like that
Some
today
people do
too.
like that.
not not criticizing brutalist art, but I wouldn't want the whole world to
No,
look like that.
no.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's where that came from, and it felt good. It felt honest. It felt like a reflection of how I feel about what I'm doing. So it's kind of stuck, and I've carried it for the last decade or so.
so there seems to be a dichotomy in you, and it's a good. And I'm not saying that as a bad. It's a good thing. You're you're both an illustrator and a fine art artist simultaneously.
Right. I mean, I think the distinctions are sort of, eh, as time goes by, they're sort of artificial.
Yeah,
I don't really believe that there should be a distinction between quote unquote fine art and illustration. It's just a different application. I think many of the same principles apply across the board, and I see a huge crossover, especially with what I'm trying to do now in the gallery world. A pretty high percentage of my favorite gallery painters either started out as illustration or have some sort of illustration training in their background, and I don't see it as an issue myself. It's just art. If it's good, it's good. If it's bad gallery paintings, just as bad as bad illustration, and vice versa. The best is the best. So
yeah. There's many illustrators. I love following the illustrators. Uh, I've been reading, for example, I've been reading James Reynolds. James Reynolds was a Robert Henry. He didn't care for his paintings, but he liked his philosophy in painting. He was influenced by Tenny Johnson, and then I like him, and I liked
right, right,
painters like that from the turn of the century. And even though a lot of what they did was to illustrate a story, to me they told a story that stood on its own. And so you're right. I don't think sometimes there's really any distinction. It's just labels that we humans, imperfect as we are, we try to put these imperfect labels on things and call it
right.
something.
And I think even the best landscape paintings have a story in there somewhere. Whether the story is about the light or the color or the textures or whatever it is, there's a story in there. Even if there's no figure or structure or anything there still has to be something being told about that scene.
So your art really stands out to me. It has a very distinctive look to it. How did that develop? What do you call it, and where did that style, if you will, come from?
So I've described it as stylized realism. So even though I'm taking the realistic nature of whatever subject I'm seeing, I'm bending it. I'm changing scale, or I'm straightening out lines, or I'm adding curves, or whatever it is to design my picture rather than have it just be a completely realistic representation of what I'm seeing. If that makes sense, I kind of filter it through my own creative uh, process and try and make it my own. I guess it's like it's one thing to paint a straight up, almost photorealistic representation of a scene, and it's another thing to sort of digest it and see how you react to it, and then let that come back out on the canvas. And that's kind of what I've always done throughout my entire career, including my years as an illustrator. So I think it's a natural extension of things that I've done, the last 25, 30 years.
So your experience as an illustrator kind of informed this new way of filtering the landscape and creating it as your own.
Right. I mean, in my illustration career, early on, I was influenced by guys like Grant Wood, Thomas Hart Benton, but also guys like N.C. Wyeth or Norman Rockwell or Maxfield Parrish, J.C. Leyendecker. All these guys appealed to me, and they all had a certain level of stylization in their work. And people might argue that Norman Rockwell is a pure realist, but if you study his work, he's far from a pure realist. He's constantly stylizing his figures and his poses and his compositions, and so it's probably an extension of just the things that I liked. I think personal style ends up being this sort of culmination of the things that you respond to and the things that you enjoy looking at, and you sort of filter it through your own lens.
So, what's the draw of the American West?
Well, I grew up here in Utah, and whenever you're driving somewhere, and I just was constantly inspired by the things that I've seen that are just so close by. Vacations, we did a lot of drive trips, and we did a lot of camping and fishing and pheasant hunting and things like that with my dad. And so being outdoors was sort of something that I just really enjoyed. When I look back on it, I've drawn and painted the outdoor world for pretty much my whole life in one form or another. So it just feels like a natural progression of what I'm doing. And there's just some majesty about the southwest landscape, southern Utah, Arizona, even into California, Nevada, all places that I've been, and really enjoy the scale of these massive rocks and the color of these red formations and sandstone formations. And it's just a beautiful thing to me.
When I was a kid, my fourth grade teacher gave me a book. It was called How the West Was Won. And she brought me back a little rock, a little piece of petrified wood, legally, from the Petrified Forest National Park. And I never thought about the West until then. And now I live in Georgia, so it's quite the opposite of that, and it has its own beauty. But the West has always been a magnet to me because it has those striking geographical features, even Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner.
Right. That was all inspired by Arizona and southern Utah and these places that I think sometimes people come here and they have no idea what they're in for until you see it. And when you travel to, say, Monument Valley or Zion National Park or Arches National Park, and you stand underneath these enormous spans of rock, and it's pretty magnificent. Well, I never get tired of it.
And I think of that word that you use, those enormous spans of rock, but those enormous spans of rock cover aeons of time.
Oh, they've been there so long I can't even fathom,
And then you have these...
And they seem to not change until they do. A few years ago, a big chunk of rock fell out from underneath the underside of Landscape Rock. And they're all speculating, well, how long will this natural arch stay up? And nobody can say. It could be 100 years. It could be 10,000 years. There's no way of knowing. But the fact that piece fell out from under it sort of amplified the change that happens all the time, even if you can't see it. Things are in a constant state of change, even if you don't see it.
That could apply to people as well. Like if you look back at your art from, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago and today, you would probably recognize a difference. And would you think, was there a turn, were you conscious of that turning point, or did it just evolve?
It's hard to pinpoint any specific change, but I do think that I point to my graduate school experience as a maybe a shift.
Where did you go to graduate school?
So I was deep into my illustration career, and I lost my dad, and you kind of have a bit of an epiphany, and you start to wonder, is there something different? Is there something more? What else do I want to do with whatever time I've got left? And I'd always wanted to get a degree, an advanced degree, an MFA degree, and it just didn't seem like the right timing. I think that maybe having my dad leave way sooner than anybody wanted.
How old was he?
He was 71,
Yeah.
which in today's world doesn't feel
No.
very particularly old. Um, so I had some soul searching, and decided that I'd like to find a master's program to sort of kickstart me back into whatever I'm going to do for the next couple decades or whatever. So I found this program at the University of Hartford in Connecticut that was a limited residency type program where you can go for a week or two at a time, and then the rest of the study is kind of remote. So it was geared toward illustrators, working illustrators is basically what it was geared toward. You could do this program, earn your degree, but not completely abandon your projects and your career while you earn your degree. And so I decided to do that, and it was an amazing experience for me and for many of my classmates that I'm still in touch with. So,
What made it an amazing experience?
well, the people, for one thing. I was surrounded by a dozen or so other mid-career illustrators that wanted to step up their game as well, or get a degree so they could advance in their teaching or things like that. And so that was great. We learned so much from each other. I think my mantra is always paint with people that are better than you, because you'll always learn something.
That's good
and,
advice. Yes.
and so just being around those people. And then I had great mentors there, some of the best illustrators in the industry. And I didn't really have a vision of where that would take me, other than the fact that I wanted to try and pursue some teaching. And I knew that in order to be taken seriously at a university level, they want you to have a master's. And so that was one possible outlet for that type of study. But the other thing was, I think I was kind of in a funk. I'd kind of stagnated in my career. I felt like I wasn't progressing. I felt like there was more stuff that I needed to do and learn. And so I set a couple of goals for myself. One of them being, I wanted to learn how to paint digitally, because I saw the illustration industry trending that direction very quickly, to the point where almost everybody was a digital painter, and it was almost expected from your clients that you could paint digitally and deliver your work digitally. So I knew that had to be one thing to be on my goal sheet. And the other thing was, I had always had a desire to learn how to oil paint. And I'd spent 20 some odd years painting in acrylic. and never really picked up the oils. And so it was a bit of a mystery to me, but it was something that I wanted to try and figure out.
Were you able to cross-pollinate both of those worlds, the digital and the analog there?
Yeah, I mean, I always think that these mediums are complementary in a way, because they're just sort of like different tools in your toolbox. You can make great pieces of art on either platform, so to speak, as long as you apply good solid design and painting principles. And the physical painting experience that I had lent itself to me being able to adapt to digital mediums much more effectively and quickly than if I didn't have that basis of knowledge. So I don't think it was a huge transition either way.
What time period was this?
I went back to grad school in 2007. I've really only been oil painting for about 12 years. 12 to 13 years is when I really picked up the oil painting brushes and decided I was going to tackle that. And the same thing with the digital. So some people might argue that I'm a late comer to both of those mediums, but I do have a good 20 some odd years before that where I've been a working professional artist. So I think filling up the toolbox with new tools is always fun. And I kind of had resisted digital painting for quite a while because I found it to look very slick and digital. It looked like this fake airbrush stuff to me in a lot of respects. And then I finally cracked the code, so to speak, and learned how to use things like imported textures and other natural brush strokes, textures, and things like that lent more of an organic quality to my digital work. And once I figured I could make it look like my physical work, then I dove straight in and started making all of my illustration pretty much digitally, with some exceptions.
What software did you focus in on?
I just use Photoshop.
Yeah,
it's probably got the most robust set of painting tools out of anything that I've seen. I know there are other programs out there. A lot of people like Procreate if you're using an iPad, and I haven't tried that one yet, but I want to.
I've only dabbled in it, but my granddaughter is 11 years old, and she is showing me how to use Procreate. The other day I saw her say, "What is that?" She said, "It's Procreate." She was doing animations.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff possible, and my son's our resident tech expert as well. So he's 23 now, though. So
wow, it's good to have your own tech support, man.
It's helpful. Yeah, he's helped me edit videos and different things.
Oh, so nice.
It's nice.
May have to get him to help me sometimes.
He's gotten really good at it. It's his job right now to make some little videos for the safety department at the university where he is. So
nice. That's good. That's good. Well, so do you use the digital tools to help you create and design an oil painting?
Yes, quite frequently I will. If you've ever gone on a painting trip or just a research scouting trip, which is what vacations with the family tends to end up being, not much painting involved, but a lot of photography. Then you come back with a lot of material that you can sift through and see if there's something there. And a lot of times it's cropping. Sometimes it's manipulating the color. Quite often I'll take the foreground from one photograph and mesh it into the background of another photograph, or I'll move things around. Scale things up. Like maybe I want the tree to be a little taller and poke up past the ridge line or something like that. And so I'll do things like that digitally to sort of work out my compositions, and then I'll go from there. But a lot of times I'll just draw, and I'll do the compositional changes in my drawing, and then I'll use that drawing to be the basis for the painting.
So you mean an actual drawing, just
Right. It's in my sketchbook, or
yeah, okay.
I'll just draw it out. That's the way I'm used to working in my illustration work, where I'll do a bunch of thumbnail drawings to just kind of distill the composition down to something that I'm happy with. That's sort of where I start from.
One of the things I have in my collection, I just started collecting them. I used to get it, and I don't know what, I must have thrown them away years ago. I wasn't thinking about it at the time. Step by Step magazine.
Oh, yeah.
The
That was a
early
great
editions.
magazine.
Oh,
That was a
man.
great magazine, because they would profile a particular artist and show you exactly how they went from zero to finished painting, and it was fascinating to me. I still have a few issues of that.
Well, don't ever throw them away, okay? I'll give you my address.
I don't have as many as I'd like to have, but I was disappointed when it went away.
Yeah, that was such a good magazine. I love pulling it out and just looking at some of the old issues. It's funny that as I got interested in oil painting, I wanted to go back and explore the illustrators, because I think they had to produce so much under tremendous pressure. And the stuff that they created was just amazing.
I love looking at some of the old illustrators. Like I said before, N.C. Wyeth, probably one of my all-time favorites, and it's nice to see that he's getting a lot more acceptance and recognition as just the great painter that he was. I get tired of people being pigeonholed as mere illustrators, because these guys were astounding.
They certainly were. I gotta show you something. This is a podcast. It's also audio, but I'm holding up a book. It's called 40 Illustrators and How They Work. Do you have this book?
I think I have this book.
Oh, wow.
I've got the old version. Where's the newer version?
Well, this one I have is 1946.
Oh, maybe it's just that you have the dust jacket.
I do, which I was surprised that it actually had, yeah, it's 1946 is the version. Ernest Watson.
There
you go. You got it. That's a fantastic book.
Mine is no dust jacket. So there it is.
I found this one for about $5. I was so happy to.
This one was 20.
Yeah, that's still a good deal.
So yeah, that's a good book.
It's very detailed. It's dense with their stories and what they do. I thought, oh, this is so good. But I digress. I get excited about books.
Well,
you do too.
See, I have a few bookcases full of stuff. So
yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll come back to the books. I need to talk about your art. So it was your paintings that intrigued me. I was really fascinated by, I think you used the word stylized earlier, because I've been looking at art when I go to the Booth Museum or look in the books. There's such a wide range of styles, but I am attracted to this. Is more modern? Is that a fair way to put it? It just seems
Um,
like a modern interpretation of the Southwest.
yeah, I think you could say modern. I also maybe would couch it as contemporary Western.
Contemporary, yes.
I think that's a word that's been thrown around a fair amount for the type of work that I do, and some of my other fellow Western landscape painters uh, that have this sort of twist. The guy that probably everybody would know would be Ed Mell. Where there's a little bit more stylized interpretation of what's going on.
So that's where a lot of my interest came back in the early 90s in fine art was from that style, from the Ed Mells and the Maynard Dixon. There was
Yeah.
another artist who was more of a Fauvist, John Nieto, those real bright
Okay.
colors. Yeah. I
Mhm.
really liked that style. And I was working on an album cover for a musician. And so I was looking for something like that. And I just fell in love with that. But then that led, the rabbit hole toward other styles, which I just love it all. But anyway,
Yeah, you mentioned Maynard Dixon. He's one of my all-time favorites.
yeah.
Such an exquisite painter, and he would run the range from very realistic to very stylized, and that's kind of the camp that I think I fall into. Some of my stuff feels a little more straightforward realism, and then it'll veer off into much more stylized application. So
Well, did you start with a more traditional approach to landscape painting and then the stylization came later, or did you start from the beginning with that influence?
so like I mentioned earlier, I think because a lot of my illustration work was influenced in a way by guys like Grant Wood and Thomas Hart Benton, there was already this stylized nature to my illustration work, and then as I started to plein air paint, most of my early landscape paintings were more straightforward because I was just trying to learn how to paint with oil, and it was more me trying to uh, capture what I was seeing and make the oil paint work for me. And then as I got deeper into it and I watched my landscape painting look not very much like my illustration work, I felt like there was a bit of a disconnect that I wanted to sort of merge back together. And so I started making a conscious effort to see how I could just pull out my natural design sensibilities and insert them into my landscape painting.
Now, did
And
that happen out in the field, or did that begin
um,
to evolve in the studio?
it evolved first in the studio, but then as I've gone a little further now, there are paintings that I've done in the field where I've gone ahead and made some stylistic decisions that depart quite drastically sometimes from what I'm actually looking at, and I think that is starting to become more evident across the board. I think everything's still really anchored in realism. It's not like anybody's going to look at my paintings and not recognize what's going on. It's just that there's a stylization, hopefully, that comes across that feels unique to me.
It's like you used a phrase earlier about a filter, and that's kind of the way I kind of visualize it. It's even from a digital standpoint, the application of filters. Some filters will refine and take away, and others will age and add patina. But it's like you're doing this editing process to create these beautiful landscapes.
Right. I think you distill your visual input through this sort of experience of years of painting and designing pictures, and it goes through that filter of what your tastes are and comes out looking like you. I've been asked by students before, oh, what do you do to develop your style? How did you develop your style? And I just tell them, don't worry about that. Learn how to paint, learn the things that you like, and at some point your style will begin to find you. It'll just naturally happen. And some of them don't believe me because they're just desperate to create their own unique look, and they don't understand that it's more about the mileage that actually helps you get there. And it's not like you can just sit down one day and go, well, I'm going to create my own style. It just doesn't happen that way. I think you just have to paint. You just have to work. You take what you learned from the last painting and you apply it to the next painting. And if there's something that you want to try different to try and push yourself, then you do it. It's a building process. And eventually, hopefully, you have enough skill and knowledge in your hands and in your brain to create the thing that you envision. And there's no magic pill that you can take to become a good painter. I think you just have to paint a lot and be very observant.
Do you still paint outdoors a good bit?
As much as I can. I'd like to do it more, but yeah, I think I'm primarily a studio painter, but I do have to get out. I have to go gather information, get inspired, go paint outdoors, get that experience. There's nothing like painting outdoor as far as learning how to translate what you see, and working from photographs strictly is problematic because the camera just can't capture what you're seeing with your naked eye. It's going to create a facsimile of what you saw, but the subtleties are gone, especially in the shadows. And cameras are getting better. I'm amazed now how good just your camera phone is.
Oh yes, yeah, but it's still not a substitute. I think you get experiences like just a subtle shift of the head. You're standing there, you do this subtle shift, and there's that stereoscopic perception that you have. So you
right.
can see a little bit behind that ridge. Does that make sense? So now
Yeah.
you understand that's not just a line, it's not just a
Right.
crack in the rock, but it's actually the heel of the butte. As you,
Right.
yeah. Does that make sense?
And then, yeah, there's things that you notice, and you bring your own experience into whatever you're painting as well, and working strictly from photographs sort of dilutes that experience, I think. So standing there and painting even just a little rough study just to get basic color and try and capture some essence of where you are is critical to being able to translate that in a painting and having people buy into whatever your vision is. Yeah, reflected light and atmospheric perspective and some of this stuff that is hard to fake, so to speak. I think you have to have enough experience in the field that you can look at a photograph and go, oh, that's where the reflected light's going to bounce from below or whatever, so that it translates on the canvas. And I'm not a master at it, but I do the best I can.
I think you do pretty good, Greg.
Some guys like Matt Smith, man, that guy's a genius.
Yeah. Man, he could paint. He could paint.
He's one of the few guys that I think his field studies are equally as gorgeous as his studio paintings, and he can make them look finished in a way that I haven't figured out how to do in the field. I always have to come back in the studio and work them a little bit more to make them feel right.
came out here to Georgia, I remember I was kind of razzing these guys because they're all Red Rock guys, and I'm here in green Georgia. It's spring, Georgia, rain, gray, everything's green. So, okay, I want to see what you can do with this. And he rose to the occasion.
I don't doubt that at all.
Oh, I wished I could have got that paint. One of the students bought it on the spot. Oh, I would have liked to have had that painting because he did. He just took a Georgia scene. This is Saguaro Man, right? Sonoran Desert guy. And he turns it into, he turns Georgia into his own masterpiece, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's why I say I like to go out and paint with guys that are better than me because I always learn something. And hopefully I'm getting to the point where when people paint with me, they learn something as well. But
so who do you go paint with?
I've got a few friends that I've gone out painting with. Actually, last fall I went out for a day with Brian Mark Taylor and David Dibble, and I'm trying to think who else was there. There are a few other guys that I think John Hughes was there. A bunch of the local guys that Josh Clare was there for a minute. A bunch of the local guys that are prominent in the plein air field.
That must have been fun.
It's super fun. But a lot of times I'll just go out by myself, and there's something nice about not having to answer to anybody when you're out painting. You just pick a spot and set up the easel and go for it for an hour or two, and then you move on to the next place and take a break when you want and go get something to eat when you want. And that's not a bad thing, to just not have to answer to anybody for the day. So
no pressure, right?
Well, it's a self-imposed pressure,
Well, I can't get out of my own head, but other than that,
and half the time they're wipers, it's like that one didn't work.
Yeah, made a pile of gray for me.
But you do what you can.
Yeah. So do you travel light?
As far as fitting it all in the backpack, or no? I'm probably more of a van painter, where I have more than I need, and I stop somewhere, and I have a tackle box that I put all my paint and brushes and paper towels and solvent and stuff in, and then I have it's an Open Box M setup made by Open Box M. It's a good little setup for my easel, and then I have a wet panel carrier. So between those things, it's not exactly light. I have some friends that can fit it all in a backpack, but I haven't pared down my kit enough to just put it all in a backpack. Plus, I like have my camera and your water bottle and a granola bar and whatever. And pretty soon you're lugging a lot of stuff.
Got to have that cooler, with the water and ice cold water.
Yeah, for sure. So I end up parking the van and setting up usually next to the van. I don't hike too far from the van. But that's me. I've got a friend that has his van where he can put his portable easel on the steering wheel, and he doesn't even get out of his van. So if it's super cold, if it's snowing or whatever, he just sets it on the steering wheel and just paints.
Fair weather painter, man.
Yeah, he'll admit it though. He's okay with that.
I think I'd have to get out of the car. I got to get out of the car. But when I was younger, I would have loved to hike. Now it's harder to do, and I regret that I didn't develop this interest when I was, had the strength.
I kind of feel the same. I wish maybe I'd found my love for outdoor painting a couple decades ago, but it's okay.
Yeah. Well, all we can do is start today and go forward, right? No choice.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to go on a trip back out to Colorado. I'll probably be going next week. Be out there for a few weeks, and
that'll be fun.
I'm going to Montrose. That's where my daughter lives. That's near where Ralph Oberg lives. And
is that in the southern quadrant?
Mm-hmm. It's the You go, you know where Grand Junction is. You go south.
Right. Okay.
And so it's about an hour from Ridgeway, Ouray, maybe an hour, an hour and a half from Telluride, that area. But it's close to everything. I like Montrose because you can go into Red Rock country. You can be in Arches and,
In a couple hours, right?
it's just,
Yeah.
or you can be in Rocky Mountains, San
Right.
Juans, or whatever. But, you just such a diverse landscape. So I like that town. It's not a tourist town. It's just a place where people live, but it's a great jumping off point, I think, for artists. I just
That's
love the
awesome.
place. Yeah, it's great. My wife asked me, well, what are you going to carry? Are you going to take all your painting stuff? And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. This time I'm just going to take a little cigar box that I converted into a 6x8 facade box. And I think this time my focus is going to be on just value studies.
Right.
So black and white, maybe some of the gambling grays, neutral grays, like
right.
Portland gray, just I forget the value numbers that they represent, but they're on that scale. And I thought I may just go and just do that. I'll travel really light because I can hold this thing in my hand, put 6x8s in there and do these value studies and just have fun with that.
I think that's the most common mistake that I see in people that are learning how to paint is they don't do a simple value structure. I did a little Instagram reel that was asking that question: what's more important, color or value?
Wait! I know this one. Color?
No. But it surprised me how many people didn't even understand the term value, that I had to explain in the comments several times. Value means your dark to light arrangement. It doesn't mean how much your painting is worth.
No way.
Yeah.
I got to go back and see that post.
It was surprising that in whatever educational realm they'd been in, that they hadn't encountered the term value.
Well, were they art students or are these just people learning about art?
This is what I don't know. Some of them are beginners. One guy admitted that he was a beginner and he didn't understand what value meant. And then when I explained it to him in the comment, he's like, "Oh, okay, I understand now." But yeah, the value arrangement of any given picture is what the success of the picture hinges upon. And I try to break my designs down into 3 to 5 basic values, and then let each of those shapes dictate how the composition comes together.
So once you get your value structure established, what comes next in the painting process?
A color study, usually. It depends, but I've always maintained that if you get your value structure right, you can assign whatever color palette you want to your painting, and it'll still read correctly. It might not be naturalistic in the colors, but it'll still read correctly. Meaning all of the shapes and the forms will hold together effectively, and they'll be recognizable. If your value structure's off, then things get confused. Like if you've got, a large shadow shape and you insert too many higher valued shapes within that shape, then that shape falls apart. It doesn't hold together as a form. And so that's something that I've really tried to concentrate on, to make sure my forms hold together, but it's all based on whether or not the value structure works. Close values hold together as a shape. So a lot of times you can merge your shadows together into one shadow shape, even if there are multiple objects going on within that composition. So a lot of times those shadows can all kind of flow together and hold together. The shadow shapes will hold your form, and then the light shapes will give you all of the detail and the information. But that's basically how I look at it.
I just found your post on this and use a really cool illustration on this. I've not ever heard it explained this way. You say value is the cake itself and color is the frosting. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, whatever you put on top of that cake is what makes it look all pretty and fancy. But if the cake doesn't hold together, you're not going to have a very good cake.
And we don't want that, man. Yeah, and you say value is non-negotiable in my book, so it's a good principle to be aware of. I have to admit that even though I know academically this, in practice, it's a real headache sometimes. Here, it's like I know here this,
Yeah.
But then when I start doing everything just kind of goes zoop, and it's all back down to just a mess.
It's like I was saying, if you can break it down into
Mm-hmm.
5 values, or if you can break it clear down to 3 values, your structure, your highlights, your midtones, and your shadow shapes, and let the composition be dictated by those 3 values. You can layer some subtleties on top of those 3 values, and it'll still work. It'll still hold together. But if those shapes are confusing, then you got to figure out how to simplify. You got to figure out how to pull those value shapes closer together so that the core of your painting, the core structure of your painting, is readable and not too confusing. And I don't go in for super complex compositions anyway. I'm not one of those guys that's going to put 1,000 figures into a big battle scene or something. That's not who I am. So I'm always looking for simple anyway.
So in plein air, you're painting small, but a lot of your paintings are actually quite large. How are you scaling up from the small to the large? What are the challenges there?
There's always a challenge every time you scale up to a bigger size. And the bigger the painting, the more those challenges start to compound. Something that maybe took 1 or 2 brush strokes in an 8x10 or a 9x12, all of a sudden you've got a 12 square inches of real estate that you've got to figure out in a 36x60 or something. And so you have to figure out what is going to go into that shape, where it was just 1 brush stroke before. It might be 30 or 40 brush strokes, or several different tonalities of color, or you might have to build that surface up a little bit differently. Those are the things that I have to try and figure out as I scale up. And I still maintain that if it works small, it can work big. It's just a matter of figuring out the surface and the added detail that you have to put in.
What are you painting on? Is it board, canvas?
So what I've been painting on a lot lately is a masonite panel with canvas stretched over the top of it. Because I do like the idea of painting on canvas, but I don't like the bounce. The sag and the bounce that I get in a bigger canvas is annoying to me, because sometimes I like to be able to scrape back in, or I like to paint with a palette knife, and that bounce of the canvas I don't really enjoy. So the way I've counteracted it is to have panels built for me where the canvas is stretched over it. For my smaller works, when I'm painting plein air, I usually will paint on just gessoed masonite panels, and I'll put 3 or 4 coats of gesso on them and sand them. And there's a little bit of a brush texture on there from the gesso, but it's not too pronounced. So they're fairly smooth.
Yeah, I like to paint on that as well. I just create a bunch of them, and
and they're cheap.
And they're fun, and I don't feel precious about it.
You just go to the hardware store and buy some 1/4-inch masonite panel, tempered masonite, and then you just prime both sides and put your gesso on.
Now back to back to your larger paintings that you mentioned canvas. Is that like, are you using like a linen or cotton or polyflax? Or what kind of pattern do you like to, or structure do you like to paint on?
So I'm still gearing up to justify the Belgian linen stuff, because I hear that's really great to paint on, but I haven't broken down my budget enough to figure out how to afford too much of that stuff. But I paint on just uh, mostly a cotton, and but I prime them. I put on a couple more coats of uh, gesso with trying to get rid of the canvas weave. I don't love the canvas weave on any canvas if it shows. I try to diminish that a bit by sanding down the factory finish a little bit to get rid of some of that bumpiness, and then I'll put on 2 or 3 more coats of gesso and sand in between, and I kind of get a texture that I just like, that feels organic to me. It kind of has, my stamp on it.
Well, I know a lot of artists like the Belgian linen oil primed ground, but like you said, it's very expensive, and I have found that I'm not really that much of a fan of that.
I haven't tried it really yet. I've done a couple of smaller linen panels, and they're fine, but it doesn't excite me any more than just preparing my own canvases. So I don't know. Maybe someday.
Yeah, I'm glad that we have all these choices. It's really a luxury that we have all these choices.
Right.
But you'd be surprised at some of the painters that are doing well and are well known, are just painting on canvas. It was Lynn Schmiel that turned me on to Polyflax and the Polyflax blends from Fredericks. Fredericks is
Yeah,
located
I've
here in
heard of
Atlanta.
those. I've heard good things about that. I haven't tried them yet.
It's indestructible. It's going to last far longer than the painting itself. That's for sure.
So
Yeah.
I think I'm going to give that a shot one of these days and just see how I like it.
So the Polyflex definitely has a weave to it. It's got the pattern. It's not as pronounced as, say, cotton duck or something like that. And it doesn't have the knots that linen does. Linen has that random look. Some of them do anyway. But
Right.
they have the little knots and stuff on there. And I don't like that. I don't like those little knots and stuff on there.
I've had to shave those things off.
Yeah.
So whenever I get a new piece of canvas, there's usually a couple of those, and I'll just take my razor blade and
Just cut
I'll
it.
shave it. I'll just shave it off, and then when I put my couple extra coats of gesso on top, then you can't see it. So
Yeah. The only shaving I want to do is when I fire up my Norelco, in the morning. But there is another. So you have the Polyflex, which is indestructible. It doesn't shrink. It doesn't expand. There is the hybrid, which is it's called Ultra Smooth by Fredericks. So it's a blend between cotton, but it is finished much smoother than even the Polyflex, and I like that. I've grown to like that surface because I can put just enough, say like Michael Harding non-absorbent acrylic ground on that, and I can smooth it out. It's almost like I'm painting on masonite directly or something like that. So I like
nice,
that. It's
nice.
cheap.
I might have to try that
It's super cheap. It's like $90 or $100 for
for a roll.
a roll versus $300 for a comparable length of linen.
Right. Yeah. The linen. I look at the prices sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, I'll
Yeah,
just stick with what I'm using.
and oh well, I apologize for geeking out there, but I kind of like this stuff. It's just kind of fun to find out what people are using, and that's how I learned, though, by asking that question. I didn't know about Polyflex. I didn't know about Ultra Smooth, and it was an experienced artist that got me onto it and showed me how to use it, how to
Right.
mount it to Gator board. Lynch Mill did that. He sent me all this information on how to do it that he'd come up with. And I thought, wow, this is great. This is great stuff. So I've been enjoying learning how to use that. So it's pretty cool. We've talked in the beginning about your experience in illustration, then oil painting, but you still do illustration work. And one of the things that just thrilled me when I went to your website is these series of children books that you and your wife together worked on. What's the story behind these books and these illustrations here?
So the first book is called If Picasso Painted a Snowman. And just a little background on it. My wife was on a sister's trip with her sisters in Paris and went to the Picasso Museum. And, Picasso, he did all sorts of stuff, all sorts of materials, different styles, all the way through his career, and really liked to experiment. And while they were there, she just had this thought, and she turned to her sister and said, I wonder what it would look like if Picasso painted a snowman. And her sister turned to her and said, that's a great idea for a picture book. So she came home and she wrote this picture book. It is kind of a what if, and it explores the idea of what a snowman might look like if painted by 17 different famous artists. So we go through in the book, and I had to figure out how to paint in the styles of 17 famous artists like Van Gogh and Seurat and Salvador Dali, Grant Wood, and Georgia O'Keeffe, and all of these famous artists. And it was quite a challenge to try and decipher their visual language enough that I could maybe emulate it in the form of a snowman. The publisher loved the idea, and we ended up doing 2 more books. So the second one is If Da Vinci Painted a Dinosaur, and the third one is If Monet Painted a Monster. And they all follow a similar sensibility in that I'm trying to imagine what these different subjects would look like if they were painted by these old masters. And talk about a learning experience, because you have to figure out what made each of these artists unique. And I studied, their techniques, the materials that they used, their approach to art making, and tried to figure out how to make each of these things look like they might have been painted by these famous artists.
Was there a surprising lesson that you learned from studying any of these ones as you created the illustrations for the series?
Yeah, probably more than you'd think. Things like MC Escher was a maniac, and I don't still to this day understand how he did all of his tessellations and all of these things that he figured out how to do. That was so hard to do an MC Escher variation. I learned that painting like Jackson Pollock is a riot out in the backyard with my buckets of paint, splashing it onto the canvas. But it's harder than you think to make a splatter painting look like it could have been painted by Jackson Pollock. So I studied, what he did, and there's a couple of old films of him painting, and I studied, how he moved around the canvas and flipped the paint, and it was way more deliberate than you think.
You became a Jackson Pollock just for a little while there. Did you?
For an afternoon, yeah.
Now, all the paintings that are in the book, did you do them all analog, or are they digital, or is there kind of a mix between the two?
So there's sort of a mix, because the publishing deadlines were such that I couldn't afford the time that it would take to do certain things in the medium that the artists actually worked in. So, for instance, the Grant Wood snowman Gothic that I did for the first book, I painted in acrylic because the oil paint would have just taken too much time. The same with the Salvador Dali. So I tried aesthetically to make them look like they would have been painted by those artists, but I didn't have the time to actually paint them in the actual medium always. I tried as much as possible. The artist that painted the dogs playing poker?
Yeah.
So Cassius Coolidge was the artist. So that one I did painted digitally. It was going to be too involved, too much time and detail,
Yeah.
and I was under a pretty heavy publishing deadline, and so I painted it digitally of these dinosaurs playing cards. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I tried as much as possible to paint the way that each artist would have painted, but there were a number of instances where I'd painted in acrylic rather than oil, or digitally rather than oil.
Well, did
So
you find yourself, after going through that experience, picking up something, some technique, some way of looking at something, and it influencing what you're creating today that you would put in
yeah,
a
I,
gallery?
I think you can't help but be inspired by uh, a deep dive into somebody else's style, and whether or not that actually filters into your own work consciously. I think unconsciously that kind of stuff does. You gain if nothing else, you gain a greater appreciation for what they were trying to do. I remember as a younger artist, like I'd just laugh and scratch my head when I looked at a Jackson Pollock until I tried to figure out what he was all about and what he was trying to do. And same thing with somebody like maybe Franz Klein, big old swaths of black on white. And let me tell you, it's not as easy as you might think to make it look good. And so, if nothing else, just an appreciation for some of these artists and what they were able to accomplish. And someone like Georges Seurat, the pointillist, so much time involved in making a pointillist painting, and I probably will never do that again.
You
But
can
it
see,
was but it was
you can
cool to
see
try
why
it.
that style kind of died out pretty quick.
Well, it's impossible
I,
to
I would not have
do.
the patience for that.
Well, and how could you produce enough work to actually make a living? And he didn't really.
Why would he spend so much time doing this?
It's crazy. The one at the Chicago Art Institute, the
Yeah,
what is it called? The luncheon on the grass at Grand Jatte or something. I don't
I
even know
don't
what it's called.
remember. Yeah,
You know which one I'm talking about.
I do. Maybe I'll,
The giant one
yeah,
that's in the background of that scene in Ferris Bueller.
yes.
Just the thousands of hours that it must have taken
Yeah.
to paint that
Oh.
is just amazing. So I have an appreciation for that, but I don't think I'm ever going to incorporate that style into what I do.
I wish I had paid more attention to my art teacher back in middle school. I had an art teacher that really tried to help us. And she was fun. She was a fun teacher. And she really tried to instill in us all these things about these different painters, the Impressionists and Paul Klee and Picasso and Goya and all that. But as a kid, I had no interest in that. I didn't, I was miserable in the class. But it did stick with me, you know? Now I think when I stand in front of a Paul Klee, I'm thinking of, well, Miss Pfeiffer, if you could see me now, your efforts were not in vain.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember my junior high art teacher. I think she was one of the early people that encouraged me. And it's not that I wasn't ever encouraged. My parents, I tell the story of when I was it's probably 8 or 9 years old. I wanted for Christmas this set of plastic dinosaurs. Just the made in China molded plastic dinosaurs that I did. That was what I wanted. So Christmas morning comes, and I go down, look under the tree, and there wasn't any plastic dinosaurs. There was a book, a dinosaur book that I still have, by the way, and a box of Sculpey clay, the bake in the oven stuff, and a set of acrylic paints and some brushes. And the note in my stocking said, we think you'll have way more fun making your own dinosaurs.
Uh-uh.
And I did.
But
And I
what
did.
was your initial response though when you got that?
My initial reaction was just utter disappointment. I was like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? I wanted this set of plastic dinosaurs and I didn't get it, you know. And as an 8-year-old, you're kind of like crushed. But then I thought about it for a minute, and my mom was great, and she helped me make my first one, and we didn't know what we were doing, but
Yeah.
she helped me, and we baked the thing, and we painted the thing, and it was a lot of fun, and I ended up making a whole menagerie of them.
What a wonderful life lesson that is.
So
Yeah.
but I think that was an early thing where my parents sort of recognized in me this innate desire to create, and they fueled it. They always gave me whatever paint and paper and things that I wanted to work on.
That's a rare gift to have parents that are
And
like that. Yeah.
yeah, it was nice. It's like, we had those conversations later on, like, so you think that you're going to keep doing art, or maybe you should be a dentist, or that's kind of using your hands, or maybe an architect, that's using your pencil. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's what I really want to do. And they sort of just supported me in what I wanted to do, which was nice because, by the time I was in 8th grade, when I sold my first painting for $50, I
Whoa! You
think
sold it for $50. What was it of? What did you
it
paint?
was a pair of pheasants flying across this snowy landscape. And it arguably wasn't very good,
But it made somebody happy.
but it made somebody happy, and I got paid $50 for it. And and then all through high school, people would pay me $5 to draw this character, or $20 to do this, copy this album cover, or whatever, to the point where I was like, I could make some money doing this. And so when I went to study art in school at university, I decided that illustration was the way to go, because that was where I knew you could make some money. So that's kind of how I fell into illustration.
It's a wonderful experience. Just having that training in illustration, I can't imagine it not helping. It had to have been a tremendous benefit to you as an
It
artist today.
it was really a great training ground, because you have to know your stuff. You've got to create imagery that's publishable, and that it answers the need of your client. You've got to solve the visual problem of your client, and you have to do it in a way that's appealing. And so, yeah, I'm sure there's some terrible illustrations that I did out there that I got paid for that I won't ever show anybody again. But for the most part, you do what you can, you get paid, and you move on to the next project. You hope that the client or the art director doesn't interfere too much in your process to kind of derail it, although that happens fairly often as well. But you do the best you can, and then you move on to the next thing. So it's this constant cycle of problem solving, and creating something on a deadline, which is also a really good aspect of what I'm trying to do now, where you have to set your own deadlines, create your own projects, and then move those out the door.
Yeah, that's so true. See, I've worked at home for decades
Yeah,
on
me
my own
too.
business, so I had to do that. Nothing would have ever gotten done. And of course, a lot of times people find out, oh, hey, you want to come have a cup of coffee?
Yeah, right.
No.
I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a phone call. Hey, you're not busy, are you? And I'm like, oh, like I don't work? I mean, yeah, I'm at work. What do you mean? Well, but you don't have a real job. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Not a real job.
The real the reality of this job is I get to choose which 40 to 60 hours a week that I want to work.
Exactly.
It's not like I don't have to work, but
And you know what? We were doing good if we only worked 40 hours.
right. Right. I've worked plenty of evenings, plenty of Saturdays. Finally quit working on Sunday because my wife's like, you got to have at least one day off a week, and she was right. And so Sunday's my day off. We go and spend some time with the kids, go to church, whatever, and kind of decompress and get ready for the next week.
I enjoyed being home for that reason. I had at least some flexibility. It was hard. It was
Oh
not.
no,
Yeah,
flexibility is great, but you got to manage it.
exactly. Yeah.
So.
I'll wrap up with one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about. The book that you did, your children's book, is both you and your wife working together. And one thing I noticed about you two, again, going back to your Instagram post and catching up on all the things that I had missed because I didn't subscribe like I should have. But there was a post about where you mentioned how you and your wife would do school presentations and you would
Right.
give creative license to the
Right.
kids. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is brilliant. I love this. How did that come about, you doing presentations at school with your wife?
Well, so the books are sort of a natural introduction to kids about artistic style and about individuality, and how everybody can have their own way of expressing themselves artistically, and every whatever way you choose is valid. And so whenever we go into a school and talk about creativity, toward the end of the presentation, I have them all raise their hand, and I tell them I'm going to give them a high five, an air high five, and that they're going to take it. So everyone raises their hands. I go 1, 2, 3. They get the high five, and I tell them, you've now received your very own creative license, which means you can create your artwork however you want. And there's no right or wrong way, just ways that maybe didn't work the way you wanted. And if it didn't work the way you wanted, then you try something different the next time. And that, there's nothing that should keep you from trying to create whatever it is you want to create. And that they can keep that license. And if somebody tells them they're doing something wrong, they can say, I have a creative license. And
Greg gave it to me. Yeah.
it's just a fun way for us to say, you know what? There's no rules. You know, create something and enjoy creating something. And whatever you create is valid.
Yeah. Well, I just thought that was a beautiful expression and experience when I read that. I said, oh man, I would have loved to have had this when I was a kid, you know.
I mean, too many people. I watched it happen in my own life, and I've seen it happen in my kids' lives, where you hit a certain age, and I think we've boiled it down to somewhere between third grade and fifth grade. Kids become discouraged in their art making, and whether it's somebody told them that they were doing it wrong, or it wasn't as good as the kid over there, or whatever. Some kids just get interested in other things. Whatever it is, they stop
Right.
drawing, and then they feel like they can't. And so we're just trying to let kids know that go ahead and create. It's okay. I give you permission, and I think kids need permission.
I think you're right. And I remember an experience that I had in high school. My literature teacher said we were studying the poet E. E. Cummings. And so I was to write an essay. And so I turned in the essay and I got an F on the essay. And I asked the teacher,
oh dear.
Yeah, I said, why did I get an F on this paper? And she said, because you did not capitalize your name.
Neither did E. E. Cummings.
That's what I said. And you know what she said? She said, well, he had poetic license. And so I said, where do I get one?
So there you go.
And she, for weeks, she would not change that. She was going to flunk me in literature in high school. I mean, here I am on the cusp of getting ready to graduate.
That's so
but
wrong.
she drew a line in the sand. And of course, being a teenager, oh my goodness, you don't do that to a teenager because they're going to dig in. And that's exactly what I dug in. I mean, this went to the principal, it went to my parents. I refused to change my signature. To this day, it is my signature. I sign everything with this thing, but it's because this teacher told me I could not do it.
Yeah,
I did not have poetic license. So that's why your little thing here touched this old man's heart, reminded me of my childhood a little bit, going through that. And I think that's wonderful. You and your wife are doing.
I think it's needed, especially in today's world where everything seems to be judged on whatever criteria social media tells you is correct. That it's okay to be an individual. It's okay to express yourself the way that you want, and just have fun. We just tell them, just have fun. Art's supposed to be fun. If you're not having fun, then you're probably doing it wrong. Because that's the bottom line. Are you having fun? If you are, then great.
Yeah. And I'll temper that a little bit with, I think sometimes we have to do things that are difficult, and that going through that difficult phase may not be fun in itself, but the results is fun,
You are absolutely correct. Like I've heard people say, I don't really love painting, but I like having painted.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the process of creation is grueling, and you're not always having fun, and it's not always going great. But when you solve the problem, or crack that nut, and something comes out correctly, or at least the way you wanted it to, and you're satisfied with it, then that's the key. I don't always love painting sometimes, but I love having painted.
And you know what? I love looking at your paintings. They're beautiful. And I hope I get to see them up close one day. That's the one downside of doing this podcast, is a lot of time I haven't seen a person's art in person. And that adds a magnitude of experience that you can't get just from a reproduction.
I think it makes a big difference. I've always been astounded when I see a painting that I've only seen in like a book or online or whatever, and you see it in person, and it's almost like this visceral, emotional response. We were in the d'Orsay in Paris a couple years ago, and seeing all of those original paintings that I'd only ever seen in print form was just amazing. It was just this emotional experience for me to finally see them up close, and you can see the hand of the artist, the brush strokes and the texture and the depth of the paint, and it's just so different than seeing something in print. And I think that's why original artwork is always going to have a place, even in this digital world. it's part of the soul of the artist right there on canvas. And I try and put some of that, put some of my own soul and my own passion into my paintings, so that hopefully when people see it, they respond the same way.
Exactly. I like seeing the little indicators that there was a person behind that. Is there a little fingerprint that was accidentally left, or maybe it was intentionally? I intentionally put a fingerprint on a painting when I'm done with it. It's just there somewhere. My fingerprint's on that painting.
I call it the evidence of the process.
Evidence of the process.
It's just it's you can see something of the steps that it took to get to the finished product, and I like having some texture, or having some brushstroke, or just that evidence of the process.
If I were to see one of your paintings in person, what would I see on the surface? I mean, is it thin, thick, medium? How would you describe it?
I think you'd see portions of the even down to the gesso ground, like the texture that I actually put on the white canvas before I even start. I've started on my big paintings to actually apply my gesso with my hand, because I become so dissatisfied with whatever texture I could get with a brush or a trowel or whatever, that one day I just thought, well, this is stupid. I'm going to see what it looks like if I put the gesso on with my hand. So I just dipped into the bucket of gesso and just started smearing it around my canvas, and I was pretty happy with what I could get. You can kind of feel how much gesso's on there, and you can move it around. And so I started doing that, and it seems to work okay for me. So even down to the gesso coat it's my hand putting it down.
Neat.
And so you'll see thinner areas, but I think I like to show some brushstroke, and if I'm using the palette knife, I like to leave some scumbled paint there, and whatever comes off the palette knife, I try to make that look interesting. And especially on the bigger paintings that you've only seen in a small version online or something, you don't get the same feel of how much texture there actually is until you see them close up. And I'm trying to even increase the amount of surface texture that I'm getting in my paintings, because I really respond to that in other people's paintings. So I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate some more of that into my own paintings. And it's a process, you kind of evolve your working process and your style as you go. And I expect that'll continue, throughout the rest of my career. It's an evolution of aesthetic, I guess.
I saw an exhibit a few years ago here in Georgia. It was all Scott Christensen paintings and Kwang Ho. They love, the texture, and Scott's really into building up with the cold wax. And I took stereo pictures. This is how geeky I get, just because I wanted to preserve that experience. Just take a right eye image and a left eye image and merge them in Photoshop. And that's fun to do, having that stereoscopic reference, just to be reminded of that texture, and that it's, it's okay to build up that paint, build that texture,
I always respond to that in other people's paintings. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that in my own. And, I think I've got a certain amount of success along those lines. It's still a work in progress, but, it's going all right.
Have you seen Brian Rutenberg's artwork?
I haven't.
Check him out on YouTube and look at how he applies the paint. When you were talking about applying the gesso with your hand, it reminded me of Brian Rutenberg. I interviewed him a long time ago on this podcast. He's a very interesting fellow. Yeah.
I'll have to write down that
Yeah.
name.
Brian Rutenberg. And I'll include a link in the show notes here so that people can find that interview in his YouTube channel. He puts out one video a month.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's, he's got a interesting take on the world of art, but I like his dedication. he's got a clear picture of where he wants to go with his art and how he feels about himself as an artist. And I just think it's quite refreshing in this world. So I always follow his videos. They're a lot of fun to watch, but the textures, and
Right.
I don't know where he gets the money to use that much paint. I'm going, yikes, that's got to
You
be
just
200.
used $100 of cadmium yellow.
Oh, that reminds me of a story. But have you ever read, I'm putting you on the spot. I hate to ask people that kind of question, and I just did it. Burge Harrison's landscape painting. It's an old book, it's a small book, but there's a section in there where he's bragging about how this student came in and the guy, he was talking about how poor this student was. And, but he really he felt like this guy had the ability to become a really good painter. But this kid was he had no money. So one day he asked for help on a painting. And so Burge goes into the classroom and takes each tube of his paint and just dumps it all out on his palette. And the kid is just going, oh, no, that's $20, But Burge did that. But, he said, because he squeezed out all those tubes of paint, he says, he said, I did have a bit of a twinge of conscience there because I know it was hard for him to come up with the money. But he said years later, the guy came back to him and said that was the best lesson he ever taught him, was to squeeze out the paint on the canvas. And he said, what you have left on the palette, figure out how to get it on the canvas. Don't waste it.
Well, yeah, I mean that's interesting, because it's like I've heard other artists say, well, you have to use the amount of paint that you need to do the job the way that you want to do it.
Yeah.
And if there's paint left over, you haven't wasted it because you used what you needed to do the job, and it's just part of the cost of the process. And so I've tried to take that a little bit more to heart. I probably still don't squeeze out as much as I probably should, and probably not as much as a lot of painters do.
Yeah,
But
I feel you though, Greg. My wife the other day, she says she's very supportive of my painting, and she's not a critic of my painting. But every once in a while, she'll let out the truth. Your family's always, well, I guess depends on who your family members are. They're either very unkind or they're very kind. My wife is very
maybe
kind.
too kind.
Yeah, too kind. So I know I can't always trust her opinion, but every once in a while it slips out, and she says, what I really like that you do is when you put a lot of paint on a painting. She says, I like that texture. And I'm thinking, well, she says, I want you to do a great big one for our living room. I said, well, honey, that's going to be at least $200 to $300 worth of paint to do it the way you're asking me.
Right. Right.
Oh, no, that's the way I like it. Okay. dickblick.com.
Yeah, it's I've seen other people squeeze out way more than I do, but then they get the effect that I like. So there's something to be said for that. I'm still trying to get there as far as
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
the surface texture, and the graphic nature sometimes of what I do doesn't necessarily call for
Sure.
extensive amounts of paint, but it's a process.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to leave, as you said, I love that, the evidence of the process.
Right.
Yeah. Greg, what's the best way for people to find out about you and your art?
I'm probably most active right now on Instagram, Instagram and Facebook, just Greg Newbold Art. My website, you can see more of my work at gregnewbold.com. And then I'm also represented by Medicine Man Gallery in Tucson, Arizona, and David Erickson Fine Art in Salt Lake City, Utah, and sometime later this summer, first time I'm mentioning this, I'll be joining Manitou Galleries in Santa Fe.
Fantastic.
So
awesome.
I gotta do a bunch of work to get to them, but they've invited me to come aboard. So knock on wood, that works out just the way I hope it will.
Well, I wish you much success with that, and I hope that I can swing by and get to see that. I've not made it down that way in a long time, so I hope I get to see your artwork in person. I like it in print, but I want to see it in person. So anyway,
well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
I appreciate you asking. This has been fun to have this conversation, so thank you.
The pleasure is mine, as they say at Chick-fil-A. I had a blast talking with Greg. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Lots of great tidbits there. If you visit his website, it's gregnewbold.com. I have a link in the show notes, but his Instagram page is really fun. He's a frequent poster there, and it's like he has these little mini art lessons on Instagram. So be sure to check that out, Greg Newbold Art, and I'll provide a link to his Instagram account as well. But again, thank you, Greg, for taking the time to talk with us today. And now I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the associate producers of The Artful Painter. These are people who provide financial support with their generous donations. And I tell you, over the life of this podcast, there have been many. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for your financial support. My latest supporter, my latest associate producer is Rose Ireland. I'll provide a link to her website. She has beautiful artwork. Be sure to check that out, roseireland.com. But again, the link is in the show notes. Now, along with Rose's contribution, she sent this beautiful email, so I want to share this with you. She says, "Hi, Carl. I've been wanting to donate to The Artful Painter for some time now. I have so enjoyed your podcast. You do an excellent job interviewing and bringing out each artist's individual spark of genius to share with the audience. I love the variety of artists that you get on the podcast. I usually listen to these when I am on the road to and from painting on location or in the studio. Thanks for your attention to all the details on the production end to make it a quality art experience for us all. Your efforts are so appreciated. I love that you are traveling along your art journey as well. Keep on painting." Well, Rose, thank you for that very kind comment there. And thank you once again for your generous donation. And please go check out our website, roseireland.com, and I'll provide the link in the show notes. And of course, if you want to make a contribution to The Artful Painter, you can go to theartfulpainter.com and click on the donate tab. And there's a big button there that you can press. And you can put in whatever you want, whatever your heart compels you to do. That's fine. I'm grateful to everyone, no matter the amount that they contribute. So thank you so very, very much. I have received numerous emails over the last few months, and I've just not been able to keep up with them all as far as responding and sharing them on this show. But I thought I would take a couple and share here. So if I missed you, I apologize, but rest assured that every email that comes in to me, I do read. I may not get to respond to each and every one of them or share them on this show, but rest assured that your messages are very much appreciated. So the first one, and the reason I want to share this one, this is in connection with the last episode number 70 that featured Priya Gore. I got a comment from a collector of Priya's work. And this is what she said. This is Paint and Pony Joe S. Stacy. "I am very proud to say I own a piece of Priya's work. In fact, it is the first cockatoo that you see shown on this podcast. So when you watch the video, if you see the video part of it, that's the very first thing you see is the cockatoo there. Well, she's the one that bought the work. I think that's cool. She says, as an artist and lover of nature myself, I fully appreciate the presence within her works. Hers was the first piece of art I have ever invested in, and it was a decision made with the greatest consideration and spiritual gravity. Thank you, Priya, for the gift you bestow upon our planet. Got to agree with her. So that's wonderful. But you know what this made me think of is a lot of times artists, and I've discovered this in talking to people, interviewing people on the show, that artists are often collectors. And that's happened to me. It's happened to me. You know, I'm slowly adding to my art collection. These are they're paintings that I very much appreciate. I've received gifts from various artists in my collection. My latest was from artist Bill Farnsworth. He was featured on this podcast several episodes ago. I'll provide a link to his episode. But he sent me this beautiful painting. He heard that we were moving to Montrose. That's going to be a gradual process. My wife and I just bought a house there in Montrose, Colorado. But he did a field study while he had visited Montrose, and it's such a beautiful painting. And he was so kind to send that to me. So I now have that in my collection. And once we get things set up in Montrose, believe me, that painting is going to be prominent on our walls. I very much appreciate it. I also, a while back, received a painting from Lynn Schmiel. It's a beautiful painting, as well as Frank Serrano, a beautiful painting from Frank. So that's how my collection has started. I also have a couple of paintings from Paul Ferropoulos. He was my Greek friend from Samos, Greece. I have two beautiful paintings by Paul. And I really appreciate that. In fact, he has one of my paintings that I did from the island of Samos. So I don't know. What about you? Do you collect art? Do you have art from other artists? Even though you're an artist yourself, do you collect art from other artists? I think it's great when artists do that. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. So I'm going to keep adding to it. There are many artists I would like to add to my collection, and there's artists that I would like to buy their art. So I hope to do that in the future. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to share this feedback was because here is a person who loves art, who is an artist, and they have collected a piece of art, and actually they own a piece of art that was featured in this podcast. So that makes me happy. Makes me happy for Priya. She's an amazing artist, and I'm really excited to see where she goes with her art. I have another message here. This is from Ed Penniman. He says, Dear Carl, as you know, being a full-time painter can be an isolating experience. Oh, yes, I will know that, Ed. It's so true. But anyway, he continues, this has allowed me to explore audiobooks, music from all over the world, and of course, programs by individuals like yourself who do it as their own art form. Your real curiosity and sincere accessibility enhance my experience as I learn and enjoy the stories of others who love creating fine art. Thank you. One of the fun things is to listen to you reference something from your own personal history and open a door to some more in-depth avenues to learn from. Best regards, Ed. All right, so Ed, thank you for that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just talking way too much at times, but it does encourage me to hear that you are responding to that, because it's just like with Greg Newbold. His paintings, he says, is a building upon life experiences, his life experiences. I think that's true of each and every one of us. No matter what experiences we have, they shape who we are as an artist. So thank you for acknowledging that, Ed. I really appreciate you taking the time to send me that email. Now, this one comes from Penelope Laird. She says, "Dear Mr. Olson, I only recently discovered your podcast, but I really enjoy your fun, happy, informative, and funny conversations with contemporary artists. I just listened to your conversation with American Impressionist David Boyd Jr. Thank you for introducing me to his work. I love urban landscapes, and David Boyd's urban landscapes are so evocative and full of depth and detail that I feel like I'm part of the picture somehow. Great landscapes like Boyd's that capture a real sense of place give me a weird but not unpleasant tingling sensation in my chest and stomach. It's sort of a sense of the atmosphere or even the personality of the particular landscape that I feel. Thanks again for your inspiration. Good luck with all your creative projects, Penelope." Well, Penelope, thank you so much. Finally, I have one last email. Actually, it's not an email. I had a listener take me up on the offer of using my voice email feature on my website. This is from Stephen Wilson.
Hey there. Wonderful program. I just wanted to send you this quick note about Lyron Jankowski and how much I think you're going to enjoy his attitude. You're going to love this guy. And I just love the program, and I can't wait to hear the next episode. Every time that I get a notification saying there's a new episode, I'm just so excited to throw my headphones in and have a listen. Great job. Keep it up.
Stephen, thank you so much for leaving that voicemail. Now, if you'd like to leave a message like Stephen did, all you have to do is go to theartfulpainter.com and click on the Contact tab, and you will see a widget there. You just click the button, make sure your microphone is on, and you can record a brief message. So the things that you can share would be just, feedback like Stephen did. Is there a resource that an artist can benefit from? Do you have a question? Do you have a funny experience or an uplifting experience that other artists might enjoy? Are there other artists I should know about but I haven't heard about? It's wide open. Except, don't use this feature to pitch yourself as a guest on this show. That's all I ask. Do not pitch yourself as a guest. Pitch someone else, okay? Cast your bread upon the waters, and it will return to you. So anyway, I appreciate you all taking the time to comment. As I mentioned before, while I may not be able to respond to everyone, and I may not be able to share every message on the show, I do read every single message, and I very much appreciate it. Well, that brings us to the close of this edition of The Artful Painter. May your tubes be full of beautiful and light, fast colors, and your brush strokes made with confidence. I'll see you all in the next edition of The Artful Painter.
Picture on the TV.